So we're now going to start talking about a case study that puts into practice the concepts we've discussed with respect to Spring WebMVC. And we'll cover that through the rest of the class. We'll probably finish, maybe start a new topic, but this is the thing we're going to focus on now. And the case study will demonstrate how functional programming in various Java frameworks, like Java streams, can be applied in a case study using Spring WebMVC to obtain quotes from Yogi Berra. Not to be confused with Yogi Bear, totally different. Yogi Berra is an animated cartoon character. Yogi Berra was a coach, a baseball coach. And he has all these funny quotes that don't really make any sense, but they're kind of clever or just silly. And so there's a bunch of websites that have a list of Yogi Berra quotes. Like he said, "It ain't over till it's over." That's one of his famous quotes. You'll see a few other ones as we go along. So the way this is going to work is we're going to have something called the BerraQuotes application, which is a microservice. And it's going to have a BerraQuotes controller and a BerraQuotes service. And we're going to have a BerraQuotes test with a BerraQuotes client. And the client will send requests to the application microservice for Yogi Berra quotes, and it'll give it back in various flavors and forms. And you can take a look at the source code that goes along with this in this link. So let's talk a little bit about this. So the basic things we're going to talk about, what we're trying to get across here, is how you can send and receive HTTP GET requests to and from a sequential microservice without having to know anything about HTTP programming. So we're going to encapsulate the details of HTTP behind nice abstractions. And that, of course, will figure in very nicely to your assignment 1A, because you have to do very similar kinds of things. The client can send requests individually. It can say, please search for a Yogi Berra quote. Here's a string. I want you to go see if there's anything that matches that. Or it can also send bulk requests. It can say, give me back a list of quotes based on these quote IDs. So you could have two ways of being able to get access, several ways of getting access to the quotes. Likewise, the server, which is a microservice in Spring WebMVC, can receive requests individually or in bulk. And this is all important because this is related to your assignment 1A, where you're doing things with movies, right? You're asking for all the movies, or you're saying, go find me movies that have this string in them, or so on and so forth. There's something called the BerraQuotes controller, which we'll talk about in more detail in a minute, that automatically converts HTTP GET requests that come into the system from the client into Java types, like lists of integers or so on, and then forwards them to the BerraQuotes service, which actually does the work. And the BerraQuotes service performs the requested service, gets all the quotes, gets a subset of the quotes, searches for strings, and so on and so forth. So that's overall design of this system involves these key components. And why we're doing this is because most microservices look something like this. They have controller, they have a service, and this is a very common pattern, if you will, for writing microservices. So let's kind of talk about how the app is structured. We'll do this because it's important to get a sense of how things are organized in Spring, and it's rather stylized. So there's two parts. There's the server part, which is the microservice part, and then there's the test client part. So on the server part, we have some BerraQuotes, which contain the app entry point, which is really the microservice. For some reason, well, the reason why is that when Spring first started, microservices weren't really a thing, and then they became a thing later, but they just kind of hijacked the concept of an application, which used to be a bigger thing, and you can make applications with only one set of very tightly coupled and cohesive methods in it, and that's called a microservice. So we have the BerraQuotes application, which is essentially the main for the microservice. We have the BerraQuotes controller, which adapts the requests in HTTP to Java types, and then they have the BerraQuotes service. And you'll see this arrangement over and over and over again throughout the course. So that should be very familiar to you. We also have some other kind of helper classes here, components, constants. We've got the quote type, and these are defining things that are used by the server, microservice, and also by the client in some cases. Then we also have something called resources. This particular example has very simple resources. It just has the name, BerraQuotes service, and the port number that it's listening on for connections from clients. Later, we'll have much more interesting resources. And resources are basically non-code elements that are used by the parts that are the code parts. We also have a test, and there's all kinds of different ways of doing tests. One nice thing about Spring is that they have a testing framework. So if you have a microservice, you can then associate a test at the same level in the project, or the module as it's called. And down here we have the BerraQuotes test driver, which initiates calls to the BerraQuotes microservice running in the server process. And we have this client directory, which essentially has ways of sending these requests using a proxy. And this proxy is very important because that's what you're going to have to implement. It's one of the things you're going to have to implement for assignment 1A as a proxy. So this example provides a good model to look at for what you need to do. And then finally, we also have this other directory called utils, which has some reusable helper classes, one that generates random numbers and one that will be used to very easily consolidate the way in which you write proxies to talk to the server. OK, so that's just a quick overview of the case study as a whole.